All right, so week 9 is in the books, and we're gonna go over all my top waiver wire pickups for week 9, plus my reaction to the Bucks versus Giants game coming right up. And what is up, everyone? You're listening to the Gridiron Fantasy Football Podcast for Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. And I'm Chip, I'm your host, and thank you so much for listening today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you'd like to share our podcast, you can find us over on Apple and Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us over on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So please support the show, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss any more episodes. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about all my top waiver wire pickups for week 9. But before we get into that, we're going to get into some of the news that took place on Monday. And it's big news. And to start off, NFL Network's Ian Rappaport has reported that George Kittle will miss extended period of time due to a foot fracture he sustained in Sunday's game against the Seahawks. Now, there hasn't been any clarification on what type of foot injury that he had. Now, there's two different types of foot fractures you can have. There's a Jones fracture, which is similar to what Deebo Samuel had, which was able to return within the 6 to 8 week mark. And then there's a Lindsfrake fracture, which is a little more serious, that takes a little more time to heal and recover from. My guess is, obviously, he's not going to play the rest of the season. He will be out for the remainder of the season, not just for fantasy, but for the 49ers in general. So, big hit to the 49ers offense. If you have him on fantasy, it's safe to drop him. He is not coming back. And then at the quarterback position, Jimmy Garoppolo, he's going to be out for an indefinite amount of time. Adam Schefter reported that he has a high ankle sprain and he could have surgery on it. It's still yet to be determined about that, but it looks like he could be out for the remainder of the season as well. So a big blow to the 49ers offense. Just a big blow in general because you got Deebo Samuel out, you got Jeff Wilson Jr. out, Tevin Coleman goes out on Sunday. It's just, and now Raheem Mostert's on IR. It's just a lot of players that are going down. So the 49ers are just in dire need of health, and hopefully they'll get some players healthy where they can have a hopeful rest of the season, but big hits to their offense. And then going to Jacksonville. Now we know that Gardner Minshew is dealing with a thumb injury. So reports came out last week that he's dealing with some fractures in his thumb. And it looks like, based on what Adam Schefter's reporting, is that 6th-round rookie Jake Luton is going to be the one who's going to start on Sunday. So it's not going to be Mike Glennon, which is surprising. It looks like they're going with a rookie against the Texans. So that's going to be a very interesting thing to look at going forward. And last, Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski has reported that Austin Hooper should be good to go for week 10 against the Texans. We all know that he had an appendectomy before week 7, and it took a couple of weeks for him to heal up, but it looks like he's good to go, which obviously will he'll take the starting position back from Harrison Bryant and David Njoku. So it's good that he's having a good recovery and that he'll be back for week 10 because they desperately will need him. But that's the main news that happened on Monday. But let's go into some of the recap of Monday Night Football. And to be honest with you, man, I'm surprised the Bucs won this game. This game was ugly from the start. They won this game 25-23 to go to the 6-2. But if it was for Daniel Jones missing a bunch of wide open players and for the turnovers that Daniel Jones was committing on Monday night, this could have been a bad game for the Bucs, a bad loss if the Bucs could not get anything going on defense and offense, because that game they were up 14-3 and the Giants were, and it was looking like the Bucs were going to have another fail on primetime. I absolutely hate when the Bucs play on primetime. Me and my buddy always joke around, and we always, we text back and forth during the game and say, "Oh, there goes the primetime Bucs." I mean, the Bucs for some reason cannot get it done on primetime. They're lucky they got it done against the Giants team that obviously had the opportunity to beat the Bucs. They were playing great on defense. They were obviously doing well on offense. They had a good game plan against the Bucs. A lot of wide open receivers were missed by Daniel Jones. I mean, I'm lucky that the Bucs won this game, but overall, it was just an ugly win. And I hate that this generally happens to a lot of good teams where they play down to their talent level of the team that they're playing. And I don't think the Giants are a bad team. I think they have it was Saquon Barkley and IR. They're dealing with a lot of injuries, but I do think that they're a team that they have a couple pieces that they are missing that could potentially be a team that's not too far away from being competitive, but they're still an NFL team, and I think the Bucs are just overlooking the Giants and thinking about Sunday Night Football against the Saints. But just overall, a bad game. Got a couple of good pieces here. Tom Brady had 2 touchdown passes. He had 279 yards passing, so not a bad game from Tom Brady from a fantasy standpoint. Daniel Jones, he did have 2 touchdowns, but he also had 2 interceptions. He was sacked 3 times, so definitely not a great fantasy outing for Daniel Jones. And then when it comes to the Bucs and the rushing, Leonard Fournette led the backfield with 15 rushes for 52 yards. Ronald Jones, in the beginning of the game, he caught a ball, fumbled, and you didn't see him for the rest of the first half. So Leonard Fournette was the guy that was out there, and he got the majority of the carries. He out-snapped Ronald Jones last week, and this week he obviously played more than Ronald Jones. So I think it was the fumble that was more of an indication of him being benched, but it's starting to look like that Leonard Fournette's going to start getting more of the snaps. And then on the New York side of the ball, Wayne Gallman, he was the one who led with 12 carries for 44 yards and a touchdown. So we did see Dion Lewis have a touchdown out of the backfield, but Wayne Gallman led the whole backfield in carries, but also in snap count. We know that Devontae Freeman was out, but something to monitor when it comes to waiver wire pickups, only because you really don't know exactly if Devontae Freeman's out, you're going to play Wayne Gallman. If you need a desperate play, I don't think it's someone you can play. I think you can add him to your roster, but unless you're dealing with a lot of injuries and bye weeks, I mean, you really are not going to play Gallman. So I think that he could be a guy you could add, but one of those guys that is a wait and see, because they did add Alfred Morris as well. So just an ugly mess in the New York backfield. And when it comes to the receiving for this game, Mike Evans, he had a decent game, 5 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown. He had 7 targets. Kind of a disappointing game. He had a good game PPR-wise, but I was expecting more from this game based on the matchup. He was the guy that obviously, you weren't really competing with Chris Godwin or even Antonio Brown in this game, but I would expect more of a dominant game from Mike Evans. He did have a decent game overall, but I was expecting more from him. Gronk had a good game. He had 4 catches for 41 yards and a touchdown. And then on the New York side of the ball, Sterling Shepard, great game from him. I think he had 8 receptions for 74 yards and 10 targets. And then you had Evan Ingram had another, he added 5 for 61 and 10 targets. So not a bad game, from those two when it comes from PPR standpoint. Golden State, he did have the touchdown, but he only had 2 receptions. And Darius Slayton, he was 5 for 56, but there were multiple times, like I said in the beginning of this recap, is that Daniel Jones missed him on a lot of wide open touchdown. Dean, the Bucs cornerback, was getting burnt all night, and it was just a matter of time that they were going to connect, and unfortunately it didn't work that way. But overall, it was just, like I said, I played the Bucs defense in my fantasy league. Like, I had them, and I'm lucky that my win was already there, because the Bucs had they had a couple interceptions, obviously, they had a couple sacks, but just a team that has a defense like they do, you wouldn't expect them to give up what they've given up, against a team like the Giants, who are missing a lot of components when it comes to, obviously your playmaker, Saquon Barkley. So just like I said, just an ugly game overall, but the Bucs get the win, and that's what's important. So now they have to go on to the Saints. But now it's time to go into all the top waiver wire pickups for Week 9. And I'm going to start off at the quarterback position. And I'm doing this, and when I start off with the quarterback position, I just want to preface that this is only for 2 quarterback leagues, because these 2 names are names that won't make you throw up in your mouth, but they're names that you have to say, because if you're in a 2 quarterback league and you're on bye weeks and you have injuries, you have to make an effort to get these guys. So the first guy that I'm going to bring up is Nick Mullins. Nick Mullins doesn't do a bad job when he goes into, when he starts for the 49ers. He actually does pretty good. So he's definitely not a bad option if you're someone who's dealing with the Jimmy Garoppolo injury or anything else, or you have bye weeks. He's a guy that you just have to add. He's going to be the starter going forward. So he's definitely a player that you need to consider if you're desperately needing a quarterback. And then my second quarterback is Jake Luton. Now, if you just need a Week 9 fill-in, He's a guy that you could try to play. I know nothing about him other than he's a 6th-round pick. He's from Oregon State. Obviously, there's no preseason to kind of see how we did. But if he started over Mike Glennon, my guess is that he obviously has some upside. But this is a guy that you can add if you need a spot start for Week 9. But definitely not a name that you're going to grab if you don't need to. Now going on to the running back position, a few names here. I think that this guy is, J.K. Dobbins is my first guy on the list. Now this is not in order of importance. This is just guys that I've listed. J.K. Dobbins, he's 49% owned. He had a very good game yesterday. He had over 100 yards on the ground. He got the majority of the carries. He played 54 snaps yesterday compared to Gus Edwards' 26 snaps. Gus Edwards is next on my list. He is owned in 5% of leagues. I think as long as Mark Ingram is out, this is going to be a 1-2 punch for the Baltimore Ravens. So I do think that you have a better chance of getting Gus Edwards than you do J.K. Dobbins just because of the ownership. But these are two guys that you could play in your flex based on their usage. And then going on to my next running back is Damian Harris. Now he is owned in 31% of leagues. He had a good game on Sunday. He had 16 carries for 102 yards and a touchdown. They play the Jets on Monday night, so a decent matchup there. He's gained a lot of the carries. He is the guy that they're going to on the ground. So this is a team that needs playmakers, and Damian Harris is at least one of those bright spots on the Patriots offense. So he's a guy that you should consider. And then JaMycal Hasty, he was a waiver wire ad last week, but he's still only 46% owned. On Sunday, he was 12 for 29 and a touchdown. So not a big game, but I do think that he will get more carries going forward. I mean, it's him and Jerick McKinnon right now because Tevin Coleman's out. Jeff Wilson Jr. is out. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to look at this, and there's opportunity there. If you need someone to be in your flex, like I said, a bye week fill-in, JaMycal Hasty's there. And then my next running back is Zach Moss. He's owned in 36% of leagues. Now he is definitely starting to play a little bit more than Devin Singletary. Not by much. On Sunday, he played 31 snaps. Devin Singletary played 28 snaps. They both had 14 carries. Now they both had similar yardage. Zach Moss had the 2 touchdowns. And for the season, Zach Moss is actually getting more carries inside the 5-yard line. Zach Moss is getting 6 carries. Devin Singletary is getting 3 carries inside the 5. So I do think that plays an important role on who you should have. And I do think that since Zach Moss is more of an all-purpose back, I do think that Zach Moss will be the every down starter with Devin Singletary coming in, in third down roles and situational roles. But I do think that Zach Moss is going to start becoming the starter for the Bills. And then our week 1 darling, Nyheim Hines, he's next on my list. He is now 35% owned. He was dropped after a lot of bad weeks, but he had a good game. He had 3 receptions for 54 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he added backflips to that. So that's even on the backflips alone, he should be added to your roster based on that. I think that's it's always fun to see players do that. I always get nervous if they're going to injure themselves doing backflips, but I do think that Nyheim Hines is a good guy to add to your flex. Now, also, I'm adding Jordan Wilkins to this list. He's only 1% owned. But the weird thing about this, he had 20 carries for 89 yards and a touchdown. Now, I was wondering what the heck was going on with Jonathan Taylor because I own him in my Dynasty League, and he was doing nothing on Sunday. And I come to find out that he's dealing with some type of ankle injury. We still don't know the severity of it, but that will give you a reason why Jonathan Taylor was not being used as much on Sunday. But still, these are 2 names that they're boom or bust type of players because obviously next week Jonathan Taylor can come out and lead the whole backfield in carries and catches. But like I said, you're adding guys to get spot wins, and if you need that this week, this is be 2 options for you at running back. And then last, I got DJ Dallas here. He's 12% owned, and he had a good game on Sunday. If you were able to emergency play him and pivot to him, he had 18 carries for 41 yards and a touchdown. Then he added 5 receptions for 17 yards and a touchdown. So if Chris Carson is out and if Carlos Hyde is out, DJ Dallas is a guy that you can play. The Seahawks like featuring the running back. This is a guy that you can play and hopefully continue to do well if he gets the opportunities. But obviously, if Chris Carson or Carlos Hyde is out, you can't play DJ Dallas. So for right now, you should be able to play him, because there's no indication that these guys will be back for week 9. So, don't put in a lot of fab for him. Just try to add him to your roster just in case. And if Chris Carson and Hyde come back, then you just drop them. But just don't pay a lot of fab for this guy. And then going on to the wide receiver position, a lot of names here. I'm going to start off with Mike Williams. Mike Williams is 42% owned. He had a great game on Sundays. He was 5 for 99 and a touchdown. He had 8 targets. I think we're starting to see him get a little more healthier, which is good news for Justin Herbert. So now you have Keenan Allen on one side, and you have Mike Williams on the other. So I think that this is a guy that you could add. Now, it's very volatile with him sometimes, but I do want to see more consistency from Mike Williams. But he's definitely a guy that you should add to your roster. And then next, I got Jalen Reagor. This is a guy that I mentioned last week, the guy that you should add on your roster for free. If you're able to do that, good for you, because I knew that once he was going to be active, he was going to be implemented to the offense, he was going to be targeted. He did have three receptions for 16 yards and a touchdown. He has 6 targets, so that's good news for his very first game. So if you're able to get him on your roster before this week, kudos to you, but I think Jalen Reagor needs to be added. And then Sterling Shepard had a good game on Monday night. He had 10 targets, but he had 8 receptions for 74 yards. So he's owned in 49% of leagues. He was a guy that was mentioned last week as well. So if you're able to get him last week, good for you. But, I always try to look at guys that have availability to them in majority of leagues, and he was still 49% only owned. And then this is a guy that a lot of people dropped, and now he could be out there in your waiver wire. I kept him on my IR. He was too valuable for me to drop, especially when you have an IR spot. It's easy just to keep guys on your IR. And that's Allen Lazard. He's now only 29% owned, but if you saw what Allen Lazard did before his injury, he was a very good wide receiver. He was the number 2 for the Packers. I think that you're desperately needing him back. Now, I know there's some talks about Will Fuller at the Packers maybe being traded there, but obviously if that happens, Allen Lazard's, obviously his upside goes down. But as of right now, I think Allen Lazard is a guy that you could add to your roster for free because he's still on IR. He is trying to practice a little bit. So a lot of people are probably overlooking him based on him having that IR designation still. But I do think Allen Lazard is a sneaky pickup. And then for the Detroit Lions, this is going to be interesting to see what happens because we saw Kenny Golladay. He's going to be week to week based on his hip injury. But then we saw that Mohamed Sanu was going to be visiting the Lions to try to make the team and be active on that roster, which tells me that Kenny Golladay may not be good to go for a few weeks. So these two guys, I have Marvin Jones and Marvin Hall both on this list. Obviously Marvin Jones is 54% owned. He had a good game. He had three receptions for 39 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 7 targets. Now Marvin Hall, he had more of the yardage. He had 4 receptions for 113 yards and on 7 targets as well. So I do think this is 2 guys based on the ownership in your league. If these 2 guys are available in your league, I'm going for Marvin Jones over Marvin Hall. But I do think based on the Kenny Golladay injury, I do think these are 2 guys that you need to add. And then going to Curtis Samuel. Now this is a guy that I'm not putting a lot of importance on because Christian McCaffrey is supposed to be coming back. And what we saw on Thursday night, that you saw that Curtis Samuel was a guy that was being used in the backfield. He had a rushing touchdown, then he had a passing touchdown. But the problem is you still got DJ Moore, you still got Robbie Anderson. So I don't know how they're going to utilize Curtis Samuel once Christian McCaffrey comes back. But he's a guy that you can try to is a hit or miss, high risk, high reward. Maybe he's a guy that does something, but I don't see him being that type of player once Christian McCaffrey comes back into that lineup. And then next I'm going to bring up Kendrick Bourne. Now Kendrick Bourne, he is only 1% owned, and he had a good game. He had 8 receptions for 81 yards and on 10 targets. So we know that Brandon Ayuk was the main guy once Deebo Samuel went out, but Kendrick Bourne is still a good number 2. Now obviously this all changes with Nick Mullins being the quarterback right now. We don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but I do think that he should be added if you really need wide receiver help. And then next on my list, I got Jacoby Myers of the New England Patriots. He's another guy who's only 1% owned, but he does play the Jets on Monday Night Football, and he did have 6 receptions for 58 yards on 10 targets on Sunday. And Cam Newton needs somebody to throw to. There's nobody there, so this is an ad based on opportunity and target share. So he's a guy that I'm just going to maybe put in he's not like high on my priority, but it depends on your roster structure and what you desperately need. But I do think that he could have some consideration based on the volume. And then I added Corey Davis to this because Corey Davis, he's starting to emerge as a good number 2. Now Adam Humphries is out, so it allowed him to, shine on Sunday. They go into Chicago, which is a tough matchup, especially for A.J. Brown. So Corey Davis may be able to benefit from that, but the Bears are so stingy on the defensive side of the ball that it's hard to trust a guy like Corey Davis against his defense. But those are all the wide receivers. A lot of names, but hopefully they're available in majority of your leagues. And then going on to tight end, the number 1 guy on my list is Dallas Goedert. So he's owned in 40% of leagues. Didn't have a very good, game on Sunday. He's only had 1 target for 1 reception and 15 yards. But I do think that the more he gets into football shape, obviously Zach Ertz not being there, you're going to see Dallas Goedert be the guy that they're going to throw to. He has a great schedule going forward, a great playoff schedule. So I do think this could be a surprising guy who helps win you fantasy leagues. And then next is Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron, he's 48% owned. He had 4 receptions for 48 yards and a touchdown on 5 targets. Now, Eric Ebron is very volatile. He's a guy that is hard to trust. There's so many weapons in Pittsburgh. It's hard to determine who's going to be that guy, but he definitely should be added, especially if you're a guy who just lost George Kittle. It could be a guy that you could go for, but definitely a guy that it's hard for me to trust. And then next, I got Jordan Reed. So if you remember when George Kittle missed some time earlier in the year and Jordan Reed was healthy, he was actually not too bad. So Jordan Reed may be a guy that, he's coming back from injury again. He may be available. So he may not be a guy that you can play right now, but he's definitely somebody you could add and hopefully have for the rest of the season. But I think Jordan Reed should be a good add. And then next is Trey Burton and Jack Doyle. So they're both, even though they've been on the Waiver Wire show for the last couple of weeks, their ownership has really not gone up. I mean, Trey Burton is 10% owned and Jack Doyle is only 7% owned. Now, Jack Doyle had the touchdown on Sunday, but this is a tight end group that I don't want to touch. I say these names so you guys have some options, but Trey Burton, you got Mo Cox, and then you got Jack Doyle. There's just too many tight ends to try to figure out who's going to be the guy that you want to play. I do think that Trey Burton has the most upside because he's the most athletic, and he played with Frank Wright in Philadelphia, but really not sure exactly, how I would trust that tight end position for the Colts. And then my last tight end is Austin Hooper. I had mentioned in the beginning of the podcast that he should be back in Week 10 against the Texans. So he could be a guy that you don't really need to add now, but you could be a free add if you just need to have some depth. But Austin Hooper is another guy that you can add. Now going into some defensive streamers for Week 9, there's a lot of teams on this list that I had put on my list, but I think they're good options. I do think that the Patriots are versus the Jets. That's a streamable option. I do think that a lot of fantasy owners drop the Patriots because they're just not the Patriots of last year. They're missing so many people due to COVID. Stephon Gilmore didn't play last week. He may be traded too. So this defense may look a lot different come next week and going on through the season. So it may not be a team that you can really even play. But they're playing against the Jets. They're the worst team in the league. It's a division game. I want to trust Bill Belichick that he won't get embarrassed by the Jets. So I do think the Patriots could have a good game. And then I have the Giants versus Washington. I think that's a good streaming option. And on the flip side, I do think that Washington versus the Giants is a good streaming option just based on the bad quarterback play and the bad offenses in general. I do think the Texans have a sneaky good play this week going against a rookie quarterback with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I think that's a decent, play. Then I got the Chiefs versus the Panthers. The Panthers have been struggling on offense a little bit. And I think the Chiefs defense is starting to become more unified. So I think that this is a team that is being overlooked on having a good defense, but I do think that this could be a decent play as well. And then this might be a gross pick, but I do think playing the Packers versus the 49ers could be a decent pick, only because the 49ers are just decimated on offense. I mean, you're missing Kittle now, Jimmy G, you're missing Deebo Samuel, Raheem Mostert, you're missing Tevin Coleman, you're missing Jeff Wilson Jr. So don't know exactly what they're going to be able to do on offense, but I do think that the Packers could have a decent game against them on Thursday night. So just options out there just in case some of these teams are not available. But so that's all my waiver wire pickups for Week 9. I hope that was very helpful. It's a lot of names to try to go through, but I want to put these names out there so you guys have a good idea on who to grab. Now, obviously, it all depends on what fab budget is. A lot of these names, honestly, they're not names that, I think the wide receivers are the ones that I would spend a lot more of the fab on, because we know that Mike Williams has the opportunities. We know Jalen Reagor is going to have increased opportunity. Sterling Shepard, I think, even though there's Darius Slayton there, I think Sterling Shepard is a safe pickup. And Allen Lazard, based on what happens on the trade deadline, we don't know anything until later on today about who's going to be traded, if any trades happen. But Will Fuller goes to the Packers. Allen Lazard is off my radar. But I do think, Marvin Jones, he steps up, and he could be the guy that actually has a good fantasy season from here on out, as long as Kenny Golladay is out. But, these are guys that, some of these guys are just plug and plays for 1 week. You're on bye weeks. Bye weeks are done after week 13. So, it's just names to kind of consider just based on what your needs are. I think, honestly, tight end, if there was Dallas Goedert and Eric Ebron, I think those are two guys that I would go after, because, tight end has been so bad this year. So it's just nice to be able to have some guys that are in a good offense and then have the opportunities and the targets. So you always want to see what the target share is going to be for some of these tight ends. And like I said, when it comes to the Colts and Trey Burton and Jack Doyle, it's just hard to determine that. So I'm not really looking to add anybody on that, offense when it comes to tight end. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for watching on YouTube. Please like, comment, and share. It really means a lot when you guys hit subscribe and you support the show. It just gives me more passion to continue to bring out content for you guys. So I really appreciate it. And on Thursday's episode, I'll be previewing the Thursday night football game, the Packers versus the 49ers. And if you like to follow us on social media, you can find us over on Facebook and Twitter at the Gridiron Pod. You can find us over on Instagram at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So that's it for today's episode, and we'll see you on Thursday. Take care.